Something's come to my attention, and I'll be damned if I know what to make of it.
Hey everybody, welcome to Workforce Gaming. I am Brad, here with Doug.
Hey.
Final Fantasy 16 finally had its DLC announced.
Yeah.
And conveniently also had one of its DLCs released.
That was cool.
So, Final Fantasy 16 Echoes of the Fallen is the first DLC for what I still think is one of the best games of this year, even with all the other craziness.
Yeah.
That was released at the Game Awards, and then The Rising Tide will come out, I think it's at spring of 2024. But so this is the first one. It's $10, which I was really excited to see $10.
Yeah,
I was expecting much more.
It was funny. I was like, I hope this isn't 20, but it was 10. I was like, this might be smaller than I think it is. But I think it was like the perfect $10 size of like a little bit of Final Fantasy 16. I was like, yeah, it's
very much that perfect if you just wanted a little more 16.
Yeah.
You want a little bit more 16 that feels end game-ish is really what it is. It's not middle of it. This is very much end game stuff.
I was shocked that, just to get into a little bit, it was the quality of the rest of the game. Like, I was just wondering if you like go down like a little bit. It's like, that's a little $10 thing. It's like, oh no, this is just like more of that really cool shit of Final Fantasy 16.
Especially, and we'll probably skirt around spoilers, but the final boss of this I thought was just incredible, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But to talk about what this is, it is a $10, basically a new dungeon is really what it is. Clive and crew basically get noise about these weird fragile crystals that have started showing up, and basically you kind of go hunt down where these are, and that leads you into this big giant tower which functions as the dungeon for this DLC. It's about 3 hours long.
Yeah.
It would take a little bit, 2.5, 3 hours, I think was kind of where I was at with it. But again, it fits in very well. It feels very much just like, here's another cool chapter from Final Fantasy 16 to just kind of slot in here at the end that gives you a lot of detail about the world, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because like the Fallen, which was this sort of like proto civilization group that was kind of like highly advanced and stuff, they weirdly did not talk about it until like the very end of Final Fantasy 16. They talked about like a little bit more of like what the purpose was, but this just like dives head full on into like what that like proto Final Fantasy 16 like the humans were like. It is so cool because I think the thing I felt was missing from Final Fantasy 16 was more of the techie stuff that I like. Like the thing I like about Final Fantasy in general, I mean, I came on with 7. It's like I really like there was like a fantasy with like a bunch of tech thrown together, so it's like a very like modern day Final Fantasy. And I felt like 16 felt, it just, to me, I'm not a huge fan of like traditional fantasy settings. It felt a little bit too traditional fantasy. So this is like, to me, like my favorite stuff, Final Fantasy, where it mixes those two sort of things. So it's like really going really heavy into tech, and just kind of hearing like cool computerized voices in Final Fantasy 16 was like kind of jarring in a neat way.
Because they went so traditional fantasy with this. So seeing all this kind of tech stuff felt like, oh, you kind of feel like you need to throw that in there because Final Fantasy always has that little bit of a twist to it. But I mean, in this, you are fully engrossed in it. That is the whole purpose of this. And I really felt like it did a lot of good just to be able to see some of the stuff, because I feel like the Fallen stuff, like your base is an old Fallen thing. Like there's so much talk of the Fallen, but to actually kind of be able to get to see them interact with some of their stuff, if that's not too spoilery, it's in the first like 10 minutes of the DLC. It's very cool. It's very interesting. And I think the general concept of, and again, not too spoilers, you find this out pretty early, is like there's this potential new mother crystal that you never knew about. Just really played well into what Clive is doing at this kind of end game piece and at the end game time in this game.
Yeah, it's interesting because the DLC kicks off. I thought it was interesting because like, so we're gonna have to get a little bit of spoilers of Final Fantasy 16. It kicks off the I think like the impetus for it. It's like you have to unlock the final mission of Final Fantasy 16 to even unlock to play this DLC. And they mentioned that this whole thing started because you destroyed all the mother crystals. I thought that was like really, really neat. It's kind of like a little like, oh, there's like a little bit of a reaction to you have destroyed all these crystals besides just how that ties in the end of Final Fantasy 16, but like an additional reaction here. I really like that. There is one really annoying aspect that we kind of skipped over, is that you need to play 2 really important side missions before you get into this. and they're not long, but they're not short. It's about like if you didn't touch side missions, so I think most people didn't. It takes about a half hour to go through like the side mission stuff just to unlock the DLC.
So yes, it's very clear at the beginning too that you need to play these two. Once you do these two side quests, it will unlock. Mm-hmm. I didn't have access to either of those two side quests. Yeah, same. Exactly. So I had to go back and like dig through some weird wiki. I think I actually found it on somebody's Reddit post of like, what do I even do to get this quest to unlock? Because I can't even do the quest that it's telling me to do because, again, there are those side quests. The thing I will say about those side quests, and this almost should be in our Final Fantasy 16 review, is those side quests should have been in the main game. Oh my gosh. Like, there's a reason they make you do these. It very much felt like, oh, people complained that these characters didn't have like this big bond, and these are like big bonding side quests for these characters.
These are in the main game. They just require you to do them.
No, I mean like as part of like the main like if you're
main campaign.
Like you have to do these two because they feel that important.
Yeah, they're huge story moments for Jill and huge story moments for what's his brother's name?
Joshua.
Yeah, it was funny that. And this is like one of those things, like it's hard to not talk about like issues like we have with the Final Fantasy, or I personally have with Final Fantasy 16. It's like, I didn't know this was the important side mission. It's like, it gives like really nice closure to like both of those characters. And then it adds them as a full party member. So the thing I really liked for the DLC is that it felt, I mean, I don't really have an issue with Final Fantasy 16 focusing on Clive, but this was like the first time it felt like this is my party of like Final Fantasy 16. Because doing both those, you unlock having Joshua as your full-time party member and you unlock having Jill as your full-time party member.
Yep.
So going in this dungeon, you have both of them side by side, and it felt, I don't know, it just felt, it made it feel like more unique. It might be more Final Fantasy as a result because of that. But just like man, some of the boss fights in this, I think this is sort of like, to me, this exemplifies both like the best and worst of Final Fantasy 16, because doing those side missions, getting into that like that little piece of it is not so fun. I mean, the side missions themselves have interesting story pieces, but going out in the open world and stuff, you're like, oh yeah, this is the part I wasn't a huge fan of Final Fantasy 16. Yep. But the second you get in that dungeon, I text you this, like the graphics suddenly get a bazillion times better, and it looks incredible.
It looks very cool.
It looks incredible, and it has some of the coolest fights I think like in the game. Divorced from icon fights, but like that's kind of their own thing. But because
I think it's had three mini bosses before the final boss, I think.
Yes, yeah.
And each one is very, very well done. Each one's really fun. They play very differently. I don't want to spoil too much what they are, but just to kind of really briefly touch on it, the final boss in this is one of the coolest fights in this game.
It is, absolutely.
It is up there with the final boss of the main game, I think, just in terms of like how crazy it is, the stuff being thrown at you, what's going on. It is very cool. Very much a not Easter egg, but a like, oh yeah, hey, that thing from Final Fantasy, if you know your Final Fantasy lore from prior games. So very cool final boss.
I thought it was funny because I thought the final boss, like this whole DLC, reminded me a lot of Nier, and everybody's talking. It's like, well, it's actually very similar to a Final Fantasy. It's actually the thing that's actually aping on is a Final Fantasy 14 raid dungeon, which I've never played. So my only context for cool tech stuff in fantasy worlds is Nier. So it feels like very Nier, especially that final boss. The animations on that final boss were so fun and so good in context of what's going on, of this thing kind of going to its limits, and it really, really exemplifies that in its animations. In the fight, the fight is pretty difficult. Some of the boss fights have like kind of like newer mechanics that they didn't really do too much of in Final Fantasy 16. So it just felt like I always like these DLCs where it feels like it's because it's endgame, they can play a lot more. It feels like, because it's like only the most hardcore Final Fantasy 16 people will play this. And it's really good. I play where I only have like half, I only use one equipable one armor slot to make it like a little bit more difficult, and the difficulty in that was like super nice. It was like actually kind of scary final boss, and the boss and all this were pretty scary and fun to fight. Just mechanically just incredible. I was shocked how this just felt like just the same budget as anything else in Final Fantasy 16, really exemplified in all those boss fights.
Yeah, especially for just being a $10 thing. I mean, I feel like most $10 DLCs feel throwaway. This very much did not, which I was very appreciative of. So it's cool.
Incredible stuff.
If you're into 16, check it out. We are Workforce Gaming. Leave a comment below. Subscribe to our channel. We try and get new videos up every Monday, and we will see you later.
Bye.